Hey, I'm trying to live until I die. Come connect, you know it's a lewd state of mind. Yeah, yeah, talking traveling. If you wanna fly, fitness and finance, living a better life, keep it raw, no filter, living with no limit. Thank you for tuning in. Come on, let's get it.
Neighbour.
How you doing?
Very good. Welcome to Lured State of Mind. It is great to have you finally. It's been a while. We got sidetracked with a cyclone in NZ, but we're here now. Do you want to introduce yourselves to our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah. I'm Andrew Chamberlain. I'm your neighbour, of course, down in St Kilda, and I'm here to talk about some work that I'm doing, in particular in the LGBTIQ plus community around leadership.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's a pleasure. And as I said, I was a little bit nervous about it. I am a little bit nervous. Look, I'm going to be honest and upfront with you. I grew up in full disclosure, I grew up in a small town in New Zealand in the 70s and 80s. And words like faggot, puff, homo were just throwaway lines. You know, that doesn't make me homophobic, does it? It just makes me ignorant.
No, it doesn't make you homophobic at all. In fact, that's your experience, and I'd say my experience in small country town New South Wales was not that dissimilar. Often being the target of those sort of slurs and terms, but it's good that we're having a conversation about it because
this is what it's all about. Yeah. Hey, look, before we go any further, we've got a new sponsor on the show, Buckfast. So we know Chapel Street Cellars, Rob and Joe down Windsor end of Chapel Street. They've come on board for the show, which is fantastic.
Great.
And they are the Australasian distributors of Buckfast. Now, you didn't know what Buckfast was.
No, I think you've got to be really careful how you say that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going to try it because you've never tried it.
Awesome.
So let's give this a crack. We'll just show the label to the camera again. This stuff, it's unique. And there's a great story behind it, which we covered in the podcast with Rob and Joe.
Thank you.
If you're searching up Lured State of Mind, I think it's episode number 6 or 7. So, cheers.
Cheers. Here's to Buckfast.
Here's to Buckfast. What do you think about that?
Very interesting.
Isn't it?
Very interesting. Is it? It's a fortified wine, is it? It tastes like a fortified wine.
Yes. Now I should know. I should know because we had the conversation.
That's all right. I got you covered, mate. Don't worry.
It's got a lot of caffeine. The temperature's just gone up in the room from one sip. It's got a lot of caffeine in it, so it's great for my job. Keep me humming. But thank you to Rob and Joe and Chapel Street Cellars and Buckfast for coming on board.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's going to be a great journey, I can see from here.
We're off to a good start anyway.
Fantastic. Now, we were talking about your youth.
Yes.
Do you want to tell me a little bit more about your journey?
Well, I grew up in a small country town in New South Wales called Orange.
Yes. Beautiful. It's a beautiful spot, isn't it?
It is now. At the time, it wasn't, to my mind, a place that I really liked being all that much. It was pretty rough and ready. I lived on the wrong side of town.
Sounds like my town, my hometown.
A pretty tough school, tough public school, and
all boys.
No, it was a co-ed school, but it was a public co-ed school. But being on that side of town, it was a real mixed bag, an eclectic bunch of students from lots of sort of disadvantaged backgrounds too. So it was pretty tough few years. And then I had a couple of years after that, I went to a Catholic high school, which was a little bit more from a environment and a bit of a safer environment for me, and academically it was a bit more advantageous to do that. So yeah. But then I couldn't wait to get out of Orange when I turned 18 and finished high school. I was off to the big smoke.
I'm sure. Now you're a gay man.
Yes.
You're happily married.
Happily married.
And you've just recently married, so congratulations. That's fantastic.
Well, we married 2 years and 1 day after the marriage equality vote was announced. So
which was 2017, wasn't it?
2017,
December. Yep. Fantastic. We're going to go into a little bit more about that later on.
It was actually November 15, but that's okay.
That's perfect. We're going to fact check everything, so
Awesome,
that's fine.
awesome.
So when did you know you were a gay?
Oh God, I had no idea until I had moved to Sydney, had been sort of taken out to one of the famous gay bars on Oxford Street by a bunch of my school friends.
As a joke?
Thinking it was a bit of a lark, let's go to a gay bar.
Yep.
And it was kind of a revelation. I sort of left the gay bar realising, oh my God,
Well, it was.
I am actually a gay man.
It was as simple as that. That one night, that moment, and a light switch. It was like a light switch.
It was like a light bulb moment, because the small country towns aren't very safe places for people that don't sort of fit the stereotype norm. And so I had no real role models, and I didn't really even know what that was all about. So it was a very sort of instantaneous light bulb moment.
So there was no inkling as you were growing up with little things that you did or little things that you thought.
Other people could see.
Yeah.
Hence I was targeted and bullied a little bit because of it. But for me, it wasn't really something I even really contemplated as being possible. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just a poor little dumb country boy, had no idea until I got to the big smoke, and then all of a sudden the lights came on.
If we talk about the struggle of growing up as being gay, bi, lesbian, you hear stories of people doing it really tough.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not hearing that from you, from your upbringing.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, my sort of childhood was pretty difficult for other reasons. I won't go into the details of that, but there were some other things that happened sort of in my family that made my upbringing tough, but for other reasons.
Yep.
So had that not happened, maybe it would have been tougher to be to be a gay kid. But it's all relative, really. But yeah, certainly, you look at members of the trans community, and we have made leaps and bounds over the last few years in sort of understanding that community and trying to be more open and inclusive. And there's still a long way to go, mind you, but suicide rates in the trans community are scarily high. It is a very vulnerable part of the community.
Yep.
There's just not a lot of knowledge about that in the general community, particularly in sort of government policy areas.
Well, particularly media don't pick up on it either.
No.
I mean, it's and they do that selectively, like throughout COVID. They didn't talk about the suicide rates through COVID. Nobody wanted to know about it.
No,
it's not frontline. It's not headline news.
I don't think it sells newspapers.
People don't want it,
or ad space online, right? So
exactly. Which is a shame.
Yeah.
But the great thing about the way we're heading is suicide prevention is at the top of people's minds now. Mental health. Yeah. And people and things are happening in that space, which is fantastic. People are more aware about it, and it's about education, and it goes back to that ignorance I was talking about. We've got a saying here at the show: it's like you don't know until you know.
Yeah, I mean,
it's that simple.
A lot of these problems, and particularly as you get into sort of more disadvantaged groups, they're quite often just invisible. Because it's not measured or really understood, and so then how do you frame policy programs and so forth around those kinds of issues if you can't even sort of see it and quantify it?
Exactly. So going back to your youth,
yes,
from
I'm
18.
Take another sip of this.
Yeah, we know we do.
You ask me a hard question, I think.
That is delicious. 18 was the age.
Yes.
Was it like a weight lifted off your shoulder? Was it an moment where you said, everything makes sense now, I can live my life differently and more comfortably?
No,
it wasn't.
No, it was at that stage. that would have been 1984, so it was just a little bit before the AIDS crisis. And initially, it was kind of like a wow, oh fuck Excuse the French.
No, we love French around here, Mev? French is our second language.
How do I now deal with this? How do I tell family members, and how do I sort of, process this?
Yep.
Because it was completely unexpected.
How'd you come out?
How did I come out?
Yeah.
I was in a gay bar and I ended up kissing a boy. That was pretty much it. And it was like, oh, okay, now I understand why I've never really had a girlfriend for very long in school, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I meant, how did you come out to your friends and family? Sorry, that's...
friends was pretty easy.
Because they already knew?
Because they already knew, and a bunch of them were there with me when I sort of had that sort of epiphany moment.
How accepting of that were they?
Very.
Yeah?
Yeah, very.
They were all hetero?
No.
No? Was there a mix?
There's a mix, and there's people I look back on now and go, had I known now, then what I know now in terms of there were probably opportunities to be more supportive of each other, being in a similar situation, but you're kids, so you don't really know. I can't think of any of my friends that were not supportive. Family was a little bit tougher. Mum cried for about 3 days when I finally told her, and it took me about 2 years to tell her.
What was she so upset about?
That's a great question. I don't actually know. We'd have to ask her that. She's not. I mean, she got over it relatively quickly, but but there was about 3 days of crying. I think she was worried about what would happen to me.
Personal safety.
Was I going to die of AIDS? That sort of stuff. So at that time, the AIDS crisis was really starting to accelerate in Sydney, and I was losing friends, quite frequently. You'd open the local paper and you'd see...
really?
Oh, yeah, it was a terrible time. You'd open the paper and you'd see, pages and pages and pages of obituaries for people who had died in the past week. So
Jesus,
it was a pretty horrific time. So as I said, the coming out part, not so bad. Other things that were going on were much more
you stepped out into a fire, didn't you, basically?
Yeah, absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me more about that era in this AIDS part, because I had an AIDS scare when I was a young lad, and back then it took, I think, a week to get a test back.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a fucking terrible week.
Oh yeah, it's pretty scary. It was pretty scary. Well, I mean, back then, it was definitely, you're pretty much certain you were going to die. Before about the sort of mid mid-90s. From that point forward, there's still people dying of it, but it's manageable from that point forward because the medications were sort of coming on the market. So, but there was that period of about 12 years where it was just it was horrific. Did
it shape the way you had relationships with other men? Was it always front of mind?
It certainly shaped my sexual behaviour. Absolutely, because it was terrifying, and when you're seeing those photos and those obituary photos in the paper every week, it's a constant reminder that that could be you if you're not careful and follow the right behaviours. But and it did actually for me anyway, and may not be the same for other people. You'd have to ask them, but for me, it drove me more to sort of want to be in a relationship and be in a monogamous relationship.
Yep.
Which I was pretty much for the whole period. So yeah, but I still like to go out and have fun like every other gay boy and march in Mardi Gras and
who doesn't
go to the dance parties and all that.
How many Mardi Gras have you done?
Oh God, I've lost count.
Oh really?
I've lost count.
So it's on the calendar and it's.
I haven't been for a few years, and I probably won't go again for quite a few years. I've done more.
You've done enough.
I've ticked that box.
Well, you're married.
As many times as I probably
married man now, so there's other boxes to tick, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's that period in your life. I mean, that's amazing. To have to discover your sexuality and then deal with something that could end your life, and it could be as frivolous as just having too much fun.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, or a stupid moment, or a lapse of judgment, or
Yep, exactly.
Too much, party
Yep.
favours, and all of a sudden you're making bad decisions. And it was still happening. It's still happening today. There's still infection rates that are,
Is it still prevalent? I thought today AIDS was...
people are still dying from AIDS. It's not gone.
It's just not in the media anymore.
It's not in the media anymore.
I thought that there was... I thought it was, excuse my terminology, it was watered down, and people that are diagnosed, they're on medication for the rest of their life, but they're not going to die from it.
But there are still people that are dying from it. Even with not everybody responds to the medication in the same way.
That's something I didn't know.
Not everybody has access to the medication. I mean, you'd have to ask more the experts in this space than me. This is just my anecdotal knowledge of the space as a member of the community who'd been through it. But it's not gone. It's still there, and there's still people contracting it to this day.
And the knowledge and the education around it in the community is better than it's ever been?
It's there's still a lot of stigma around it for people. So that's probably the bigger issue right now, is breaking down the stigma.
Yeah.
And making sure people have got access to the right counselling, the right medical care, the right medication. Affordability of medication is a big issue in the community. It
shouldn't be like that though, should it?
Well, fortunately in Victoria there's great programs that state government funds around giving people access to the medication, but in other places in the country it's not the case.
Yeah. So it all depends where you live.
Yep. Sure does.
Hey, your role, explain to us your role at the Victorian Pride Centre.
So I don't work for the Pride Centre. I work in partnership with the Pride Centre.
Okay, I'll just stop you there, Mav. We've got some photos up on the screen there. So the Victorian Pride Centre has just recently been finished in the last year.
It was finished, you're testing my memory here. It was finished at the end of 2020, I think.
Okay.
And it might have been 20 or 2021. And then it opened, and then it sort of went back. We went back into lockdown in Melbourne. So
it opened through
opened
through that period.
And then it sort of went back into sort of lockdown, and then but it's now coming to its fore. It's like you go in there now, and it's teeming with people and activity.
It's a beautiful building. So for our listeners and our viewers, it's halfway down Fitzroy Street. So if you're familiar with the block and the Gatwick, it's around about that.
It's across the road from the Gatwick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So since that's open, we've noticed, because we're residents in St Kilda, obviously, the Fitzroy Street is actually getting a lot better than what it was. There's still the homeless, there's still the drug use, etc. But it's starting to pick itself up, which is great. And this
that's something. I mean, that's something about St Kilda that you see a lot of new residents moving into St Kilda and complaining about that. But that's part of what St Kilda is and has always been. You have to sort of accept.
Yeah.
That,
and it's not going to change anytime soon. So it doesn't matter how much you pay for your property and what you think you're going to do for the community. Yeah. The community was here before you were.
Yeah.
So for our listeners and viewers, we've got some photos up there of it's an absolutely amazing building with a lot of spaces.
Yes.
A lot of areas, and there's a lot of residents in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if can you explain to me, A, why it's there, and B, how it got to be?
Yeah, well, it was why it's there. It's a hub, so it's a community hub, and it's really a platform for the community to come together and for service providers for the community to be co-located.
So the community, we're talking about the LGBTQI plus
I know,
community.
it's a lot of letters to wrangle, and it's easy to get tongue-tied when you're doing it. But we'll just call it the LGBTIQ plus community. Yep. It has lots of different spaces. It has sort of a gallery space downstairs, public area, which is sort of a welcoming environment. It has performance spaces. It has a theatre.
Yep.
And there are a lot of design sort of features and design elements that honestly someone from the Pride Centre would do a much better job at explaining what they are than I would ever do. But
look, it's open to the public,
absolutely.
So anybody can go in there.
Yeah, it's meant to be a safe place, and it's been designed with sort of, respect of the community and respect of the local environment in mind. From
They've
day
done
one.
an absolutely amazing job. It's the next time we've walked past it plenty of times. We haven't been in there. I was doing my research. I had no idea about the internal spaces, all the services that it offers, and just exactly what goes on in there. So next time we go past, we're going to pop in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just look at the architecture.
You can do. You can book in to do a tour, and you'll have sort of a guided tour. One of the volunteers will take you around and explain all of the elements of the building. When you walk in, you'll see the concierges at the front. They're all volunteers. So it has a lot of volunteers that support the building. It has no ongoing government funding, which is really important. So it completely relies on patrons, donors, sponsors.
I was going to ask you that because in my research, so the Victorian government came up with half the amount, I think. Where is it? I've got it here somewhere. And then the rest was contributions from sponsors, donors.
Yeah.
And that's ongoing.
No, there's no ongoing
Not from the government, no,
funding,
but
all of the fundraising to keep the place running is paid for by sponsors, donors, patrons, and also obviously the tenants of the building are contributing in terms of rental.
Can you tell me about some of the tenants that are in the building?
There's tenants like Thorn Harbour Health, who's formerly the Victorian AIDS Council. They provide a lot of health-related services. There's, I think there's a legal service. There's the...
You've got a mortgage broker in there, haven't you?
That I don't know.
I thought
I've got a mortgage broker in my house, but
I thought I read there was a mortgage broker there.
There's lots of services.
There's lawyers.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's lots of services there, but they're all designed for sort of creating a place where you can access all those services in a safe way. You can sort of imagine, if you're a transgender person, how vulnerable you might feel walking into.
I was going to say,
sort of a general practice that doesn't really understand your needs and doesn't necessarily cater for you.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because you've said safe twice.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
Because people are not as accepting as they should be. And if you're getting a mortgage or you're getting your teeth cleaned or what, you should feel safe doing what you're doing. That should be your God-given right.
Yeah.
Especially in a society like today, and especially in Australia and Melbourne.
Absolutely.
We've come too far to go back again.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me more about what you do with the centre and your role? And explain to me what you do.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll sort of explain the how I got there first, if that's okay.
Do that, that's fine.
Because that's sort of...
That's part of the journey.
That context to be really useful. So I took a break from corporate life into 2019 after I got married. And corporate life. I was in sort of, big corporate enterprise. And I decided I want to take a career break. And then, of course, COVID arrived in about middle of March 2020, right in the sort of middle of my
sabbatical.
My sabbatical, or sort of year off. And so then I'd sort of, what am I going to do for the next year? So I started doing some consulting work and some coaching and some consulting work, and that led to a leadership program being developed for one of my corporate clients. And I'd started working with a coach of my own, an executive coach of my own, and she's fantastic. She's really sort of helped me really reshape my purpose and what's really important to me and what I value.
Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, so it really ended up being around, I wanted to do something that was meaningful, contribute to the community, give back, but also create something that was long-lasting and evergreen. And as I was sort of working with her, we sort of said, well, how important would enabling LGBT community members to be more effective leaders and to sort of be able to have more representation in leadership roles? How cool would that to be able to offer that and sort of repackage my sort of leadership program to a community-based leadership program?
Sounds like a perfect fit for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I was like, okay, I'm really excited about that. How am I going to make that happen? And I used to do a Friday COVID walk with one of my buddies every Friday, and we'd take different routes, and we'd quite often walk down.
Did you go the 5K zone?
I'm not going to admit to that.
Were you one of those?
Possibly. But we quite often walk down Fitzroy Street down to the beach, and buy a coffee or whatever we could down there, and then sort of walk back through the St Kilda Botanical Gardens, and we saw this building sort of rising from Fitzroy Street. Like, what the heck is that building? And then we sort of stopped one day and was like, it's almost finished. It's a Pride Centre. I didn't even know.
No idea.
No idea that was even built. I so tunnel visioned my corporate job that I wasn't really even paying attention to what was going on even in the local community. And so as I'm having this conversation with my coach about is my purpose and what do I want to focus on and how am I going to give back and contribute, I knew I needed to partner with some organisations that had connections to the community. I'm like, well, the Pride Centre seems like a perfect fit. So about a week after that conversation I had with her, I approached the Pride Centre through a contact and someone on the board who organised a meeting. I went in and pitched it. I was like, yeah, let's go. I pitched what I wanted to do and what I thought I could bring to the table and how I thought we could make it work. And like, yeah, we love it. Let's do it. So that was in February 2022. We launched the program in June 2022, and we kicked off the first workshops of a 12-month program in October 2022.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing.
So we're coming up to a year in October.
Yeah. No, the first graduation will be in November 2023 this year, and we're just working through sort of launch details for season 2 of Pride in Action. Yeah, we've got 24 amazing, diverse leaders that are all bringing so many interesting different angles to what leadership means and what it means for them.
If you can pick one of them,
oh God,
and describe them.
Well, we have one. I'm not going to talk about names.
I'm talking. Describe them as a leader, as what they're achieving in this program.
They're also different. One of the parts of the application process was they had to pitch a passion project, and for me, Pride in Action was my passion project for 2022, and so I really wanted to really only have people in the program that had passion, had something meaningful they wanted to achieve out of the investment of their time and my investment in them, as well as the Pride Centre's investment in them. And so really the key criteria was, what was the substance and the vibe of their passion project, and did I think that giving them more sort of leadership skills and tools and knowledge and an experience over a 12-month period would really help them achieve those passion projects. There's everything from a transgender op shop to sort of a referral hub for teens and young people to access services, to how do we get stories and storytelling from people that are a little bit older in the community that might not necessarily have much of a voice, and what could we do to actually give them voice.
Can you elaborate on more projects and more things that we can look forward to hopefully coming out of this program?
It's a little bit early, so we're into session 4. In September, we're planning to do a showcase where we'll invite some of the sponsors and the supporters to come and see there's 4 project teams in the 24. In the group of 24, they're sort of divided into 4 projects that they selected that they wanted to work on as a team. They'll get an opportunity then to pitch their projects and try and get other supporters on board to help them realise some of these really, some of the projects are quite inspirational and aspirational.
And mate, I can't wait to see the results from it.
We need to sort of give them a chance to actually, do all the hard work in figuring out, how they're really going to be able to bring these to life.
Well, you've got to start somewhere, don't you?
And it's, none of these things are one and done. They're all very much sort of, the journey for them, I hope, won't end in November.
Exactly. Well, that's not the point. That's not the point of the project, is it?
Exactly.
Exactly. It should never stop there.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about community.
Mm-hmm.
As a gay man, in your community, what do you do to add value to your community personally?
Personally, this is the
Exactly what we're doing right now.
Yep. The more I talk about it, I hope that other people feel comfortable talking about it. I hope people like yourself feel comfortable asking questions, or not feel uncomfortable asking questions if they don't know.
Well, as I said, I was nervous because when you look at, I mean, I've done some research. It's a bit of a minefield.
It can be. Yeah.
From my point of view, it's like, okay, we've got a set of rules for this group, and this group wants to go this way, and that group wants to go that way. And as I said, once again, if you don't know those set of rules, you could say or do something that would be offensive to them. Now, I've never purposely gone out to offend anybody in my life.
Yeah. I think I had sort of the same reservations when I first started this journey. In fact, that's one of the reasons I wanted to work with some community organisations, because there are certain nuances around different community members and groups that I just didn't understand what the dynamics and the issues and the whether it's politics or it's specific needs or issues. I just didn't understand the specifics, and so that's why I wanted to work with community organisations. And at least from my experience, being humble about, I don't really understand this, I'm curious.
Yeah,
I'd like to know more, and I'm probably going to make a couple of mistakes along the way.
Well, you're going to learn from those mistakes. That's a good thing.
But if you're willing to sort of tolerate me making a couple of mistakes in order to learn and figure out how can I add value, then
well, is that the key word, tolerance? It's about being tolerant of people's shortcomings, their misgivings, their mistakes, their attitudes.
I think so.
Because I mean, you look at the older generation, and they're not tolerant. They're set in their ways. And I always
feel like you're talking about us. Aren't we
no,
part of the older generation?
No, we're not. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. I said to myself that I was not going to grow old and form habits as I got older, and close myself off to learning more and knowing more and being a better person. The difference between me doing that and maybe the older generation that just don't want to know or hear about it, it's chalk and cheese. But do we still think that is that acceptable to the community, or is it just something that we have to live with? An example.
Yeah, give me an example.
An example. We were in a small country town. We'd broken the windscreen on our car.
Yes.
And it was 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. They managed to get us in and do the windscreen, and we took them a box of beer, and we had a discussion with them about property prices.
Right.
Because we were looking at some rural property, and the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, the gays." He says they've just pushed up the property prices, and it was abrasive. And we took it on board. I didn't say anything about it because he was an older generation of the older generation, and I just accepted that that's his outlook on things. And some people may think that that's offensive. I think to a gay man, I think that should be a compliment because they push up property prices.
Yeah, was this in Dalesford, by the way?
It was close. We were on our way to Dalesford.
Right.
We were on our way to.
Okay.
Have I told you this story?
No. It sounds like a rip snorter.
The gays, and as I said, my wife and I just looked at each other, and and I just look at people like that, and I go, I can't really judge him because that's his mindset. Call it ignorance or arrogance or whatever. He is who he is. So I shouldn't be judging him on that comment.
No, but you shouldn't. I mean, from my perspective,
if I was a gay man, he probably wouldn't have said it to me. He would. Maybe he would have said it. I don't know. But if he'd said it to you, would that be offensive to you?
Well, I personally wouldn't have been offended, but I would have felt compelled to challenge. Why do you say that?
Okay. So if I'm him,
if you're talking about,
if I'm him and I said, "Oh, the gays have pushed up property prices. Oh, the gays have pushed up the property prices around here."
Yeah.
What would you say to me?
I'd want to know how he comes to that conclusion. Like, how does he come to the conclusion that it's the gays' fault that property prices have gone up in a particular area?
Well, true. Maybe the
Because
talk around.
I'm sure there's lots of straight people that have moved into, regional areas that have probably overpaid for properties as well. So is it all the gays' problem?
No, what it said, as I said, he probably didn't think it was the gays' problem, but he was taking a situation that had changed or shifted in his world, and he related it to the gay community.
Yeah.
So
I would say he's probably got deeper issues going on.
Well, exactly.
Potentially.
So talking about being offended,
Yeah.
what offends you as a gay man?
What offends me as a gay man is seeing injustice or discrimination or not letting people realise their full potential, or being ignorant about it and not even realising that you're doing it. That offends me, and those are the things I will actively seek out and challenge directly.
So we relate back to that guy.
Yeah.
He's ignorant.
Well, clearly.
So that's
like, I don't think I've ever heard any economic research that proves gays are responsible for property prices.
Look, I'll tell you what, I've actually printed out a couple of sheets, and there's been some articles in some Sydney papers that specifically says exactly what we're talking about. That gay couples have pushed up property prices by some amount, by an exponential amount. Believe what you want to read. To be quite honest, it's just fluff to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to take a look at those articles. I suspect they might have come from a particular news organisation that I won't name.
Okay, so getting back to what offends you.
Yeah.
Injustice.
Yeah, injustice. Yeah.
Give me an example.
One of the very first examples I saw was when I first started working, and it stuck with me to this day.
How old? What age are we talking?
I was 18, 19. I just moved to Sydney. I just started my second job and was about to start going to TAFE, actually, because I couldn't afford to go to uni full time. My parents weren't very well off. And anyway, so I started this job at, it was actually at the Electricity Commission of New South Wales, which was a very old state government organisation. Anyway, there's this amazing woman who sort of took me under her wing and was sort of training me and giving me advice and whatever. And I'd sort of noticed that she was being sort of talked about behind her back, and people would snigger and make jokes. I didn't really understand what was going on until someone told me that she was trans. And she was the very first person in that organisation that had ever made the transition from, a male sort of presentation to trans female presentation, trans woman presentation,
while being employed.
And
so she was supported through the transition.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think it was pretty tough. You're talking sort of the early 80s.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. It wasn't the usual.
It would have been horrible.
Yeah. So even to the point where she could only go to the bathroom in the sort of chief medical officer's suite because she couldn't go into the male or the female toilets.
So she was full transition.
Well, I don't know this.
Okay.
I never inquired on the details, and it's not my place to. But I was just horrified that anyone could be treated that way in a workplace, and be even more horrified that I didn't speak up and say anything at the time.
Would it have made any difference? Do you think?
It might have made a difference to her. Yeah, it might have made one. If it made one person sit up and realise they were doing something that was just not right, it might have made a difference.
I wonder where she is now.
I don't know. That was a long time ago. That was very, very beginning. Of
I
my
just
career.
hope her journey was fulfilled.
I honestly I don't know, but it was my experience with her was a very short window of time, but
Okay.
what I observed sort of has stuck with me for a very long time. As being an example of what's not okay.
So the intolerance is offensive.
Yep.
Do you get offended on a regular basis nowadays?
No, not really.
No?
No.
It's
Personally offended? No, not me personally. I'm pretty resilient.
yeah.
And I'm also a very privileged member of the community because I'm, cis male. I'm not from a non-Caucasian background. I have relative amount of sort of well-being and financial security that
Yep.
others don't necessarily have. So I'm in a very privileged position that I probably don't see, I definitely don't see or experience what others might.
So we're talking similar to white privilege.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you think white privilege is offensive?
I think not realising you have white privilege is offensive, and not understanding that not everyone has access to the resources and the opportunities that you have. That's a little bit offensive. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's about education.
Isn't everything? Isn't everything?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by Holy Shirt Australia. Holy Shirt Australia are 100% online. They're Australia's largest no minimum custom print and embroidery company. All their services are completed in-house and they can deliver all orders promptly and professionally. They like to keep it simple and straightforward, so they offer cool stuff that can be custom printed or embroidered to your liking. They have an easy-to-use online designer to build your custom apparel from the comfort of your home or office. They offer pricing that reflects your individual order, and remember, they are no minimum on all their products. They deliver what the customer expects when they expect it. They've got over 1,500 products ready for you to custom print or embroider today, right now. So head to holyshirt.com.au for all your custom clothing requirements. I'd really love to hear a little bit more about your role and what you're doing in this community.
Yeah, great. I'd love to talk a bit more about that. So the program is designed around taking 24 up-and-coming leaders through a 12-month program. It's really an experience, really, is with the premise of it. When I first started developing this leadership program content, I spent a lot of time researching what were the elements of good leadership. And there's lots of different ideas around that, but it sort of boiled down to there was a set of best practices that, define what good leadership was and what great leadership was. And that's not to say that everybody needs to be good at all 14 things. But if you're good at 3 or 4 of those things, then you have the potential to be a great leader. So that's sort of the basic premise of it. The basic structure of it is that we go through an application process to really try and understand the leaders and the cohort of leaders. We assess the applications based on their passion project, as I mentioned before. But also we want to make one of the things that we did really focus on a lot, and I did this in collaboration with the Pride Centre, was to really try and have representation or equitable representation across lots of different groups. And so sometimes with these sorts of programs, you'll quite often end up with a very strong skew to cis male applicants. Yep. And so we really had to work hard to make sure we were reaching as many groups through as many different channels.
Have you achieved that?
Pretty close. There's I think we fell a little bit short on getting enough representation from First Nations, and that's something we want to work on in season 2 to try and increase that. And that was really a learning for me around how you engage that particular community is quite different from how you would engage other applicants, because they don't respond in the same way to online marketing and online application forms, and you sort of need more of a word of mouth and community-based
Okay.
approach.
So that's how you're going to rectify that next time?
I don't know. To be honest, I haven't really solved that problem yet. We still got to sort of work through how we try and do better next time. But in terms of other representation, I'm pretty comfortable that we got good representation across the trans, the lesbian, the bisexual, and those groups. The two we filled out as First Nations, and the other one was the intersex group, which is a very hard group to sort of get, because there's still a lot of stigma around intersex.
Can you explain to me intersex?
Intersex is if you think of sort of physiological gender as a spectrum.
Yep.
Not everyone neatly falls into male or female.
Yep.
And there are variations in between. So, but it's a very hard thing to define, a very hard thing to engage around, because it's still quite stigmatised. What I was really pleased about is we really got a great response from the trans community, and that was a little bit unexpected. I wasn't expecting to get quite so much engagement and involvement, and that's been really, really great to have good representation from that part of the community, because they bring a very valid and different set of experiences to, you know, someone who's come out of a, you know, financial institution that's a cis male.
Yep.
And that really helps to make sure that we've got, particularly in these project teams that we've got running, that are focused on, you know, their selected passion project as a team, that real diversity of an insight around how to actually address a particular area or a particular need in the community. So that's kind of exciting to see that sort of collaborative diversity magic sort of happening real time in the session. So the way it runs is we sort of the first session is called a co-design session. So we get the participants in the program to look at all of the topics that are available in the library, and then they work as a team to select what topics they think are most important and put them in the sequence that they would like to run them. So they have some ownership around what the content of the program is and how the program is actually constructed, and they really liked that. It gives them a sense of they're actually sort of in control of the curriculum, as opposed to being...
Well, they're taking ownership of it, aren't they?
As opposed to sort of being run through a cookie cutter.
Yeah.
They actually get the opportunity to customise it. And then in that co-design session, then they also had the opportunity to sort of pitch their individual passion projects to the rest of the group, get votes for their passion project, and then recruit team members onto their passion project. So
where they recruit them from?
From within the cohort.
Okay.
So the 24 passion projects, sort of the 4 get voted, and then they sort of nominate onto the project teams they want to work on. So that's pretty exciting. So them get excited about that.
Has there been any drama? Yeah,
there's been a few.
Any reality TV situations?
No, nothing like that. Nothing like that. But it's, you know, it is challenging to start with a blank sheet of paper.
Yep.
And if you've not done something like that before, it's a big difference between having an idea and actually bringing it to life.
Oh, for sure.
You know, and it's, I can speak from my perspective in terms of Pride in Action. I had the idea, and then all of a sudden it very quickly came to life. It's very motivating and exciting, but if it's a long, drawn-out process, maintaining the focus and the enthusiasm around keeping it going and pushing forward is something that some of those teams will find quite challenging over the coming months, and have already had a few, sort of stumbles and setbacks and resets.
Well, that's going to happen, and it's just part of the journey.
It is part of the journey,
of the learning.
But it's absolutely part of your leadership journey, because...
Oh, for sure.
What leader...
Leaders aren't born.
Has ever had the experience where it always comes easy? None. Like, if you think it's going to come easy, you're not probably going to be cut out for a leadership role.
No. Well, tell me about some of your leadership situations. What's been a highlight in your career?
A highlight in my career?
There's got to be many.
Yeah. I think the opportunity to go to the US and do something completely out of my comfort zone.
Please explain.
So I was working for an IT company, sort of late 90s. They started restructuring, sort of 2001. And they did this thing which is quite interesting. I've never seen any other company do this, where they did, for every employee in the company, and about 120,000 employees in the company, they did basically a talent review, talent assessment. And then based on that talent assessment and an interview with a sort of executive panel, you were then offered roles in the company that best fit your talent. And so I was offered a role in the US. At the time I was living in Sydney, and I had never, ever contemplated working overseas. I was very happy in Sydney, had a great life, all the rest of it. And so, I was offered this role. It was supposed to be for a 2-year assignment. I ended up staying 6. And it was transformational for me as a leader. I had to sort of parachute into a city that I'd never lived in, knew nobody. They spoke the language, but there were a lot of things that were not very familiar in terms of the cultural things. And you probably experienced that even just across the ditch. Well,
travel transforms anybody that partakes in it.
Yeah, but it was
one way or another.
It was the having to start completely from scratch, building a home, a network of friends, a community, all the rest of it. That was the first 6 months. I didn't think I was going to make it, but once I got through the first 6 months and I started to get some traction and build a bit of a network, it became a little bit easier. But it was hard being away from family and friends.
Even though you're as far away as America, it was the same for me when I came from New Zealand to Australia. You've got to do the same thing. You've got to get bank accounts. You've got to rent. You've got to re-establish all those connections that you had back home in a different way in a different place with a different culture.
So, but after about, as I said, after about 6 months, it started to get a bit easier. After about 18 months, I was in sort of the groove, and
so you enjoyed the role?
Then the next few, I had various different roles over there. That's one of the things of my career has always been sort of I change a role every 18 months or so.
Keep it fresh.
To keep it fresh, I like a challenge. I like the intellectual sort of challenge and the stimulation of sort of learning something new or trying something that's a bit more challenging, and that sense of accomplishment when you overcome something is a bit out of the ordinary from what you've been used to. So that was for me. That was sort of a life transformational experience.
How old were you?
Would have been 2001. So I was 32 when I moved over there. Yeah. So I've been around a bit by that stage.
Around the traps.
I've been around, a bit.
Yeah, you weren't the first kid off the off the ship. Yeah. Tell me more about that.
About the leadership journey overseas, or
when did it? It was a 6-year stint.
Yeah, well, it was originally supposed to be for 2 years on a sort of a project assignment, and I'd finished my part of the project in about 12 months. So then I was sort of looking for something else to do, and so they offered me a different role, and then I went local and was looking after some clients in North America for a while. And the company sort of hit hard times, and they started downsizing, and over there it's really management by spreadsheet, and you don't really got a lot of warning. And then there was an opportunity to work for a consulting firm in Dallas, and I went for the interview on the Friday. They offered me the job straight away, and then on Monday they called me and said, "We've had a change of heart." And I was like, "Oh, what's now? What I'm going to do?" They said, we want to know if you'd be interested in going to Melbourne to help turn around the Melbourne office. And so I was like, let me talk to my partner at the time about it. And he was like, yeah, let's quit, sell everything, let's move to Melbourne.
Get out of here.
Like, but you've never been to Melbourne.
Was your partner American?
Yeah. So, so sort of almost on a whim, we sold everything, packed up and moved to Melbourne.
That's how it should be done.
Yeah, well, it was challenging. It was actually just as challenging to move back to Melbourne as it was to move to.
So you weren't yearning to come home. You weren't at that point.
Oh
where,
no, I was ready. I was ready to come home, I think.
Yeah.
But I hadn't really contemplated that because I'd sort of wanted to make a life there.
Yeah.
But when
you were set on living your life out
Yeah,
in America.
That's what we're going to try and do. But when the opportunity presented itself, it's like, well, the door's wide open. We just got to walk through it.
So that time of your life, being in America, the attitudes towards you as a gay man, was there any differences between there and back in Australia?
There were some subtle differences in, between Sydney, the community culture in Sydney. So
do we agree that Sydney's the gay capital of Australia?
No, not really.
No?
Not really. But my experience was in Sydney. So in Sydney, it was sort of very like, I had lots of lesbian friends. I had lots of gay friends that was also quite integrated. In Dallas, at least, it was very separate. Like there was a lesbian community and a gay community, and they did not really interact very much. So that was kind of like, okay, there's a bit of conflict or a bit of a disconnect between these two groups. So it's a bit more sort of fragmented, I think, in the US.
And it's not like that here. Because I was going to ask you that.
I think it's a lot more cohesive and sort of collaborative here and sort of connected here.
More so now? Was it ever? Because that was a question I was going to ask you. So when you think about the community, we use the analogy of sports.
Yeah.
It's made up of different codes and different teams, and somebody might like motorsport and somebody might like cricket. It doesn't mean that they're going to get on together, or they.
Well, there'll be things that people like different stakeholders are going to disagree on. That's fine because their needs are different, or their position or challenges or whatever is different. But there's a lot we can and I think the Pride Centre is a great example. There's a lot we can collaborate on where there is shared interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's no diversity within the group. There's no, as you say, pockets of groups that don't interact with each other.
There definitely are, but I think they're very much sort of, it's less pronounced, at least in my experience here than it was there. But, my experience in the States was nearly 20 years ago. So you got to sort of put that in context as well. It's probably changed since I lived there.
So if we talk about the difference between the United States and Australia, if we're talking about same-sex marriage, and we talked about it earlier, it was finally passed in law in 2017. We had the specific dates. Can you tell me the dates?
November the 15th.
All right.
Oh, sorry, that was the vote was announced on November the 15th, 2017.
And Australia had a struggle for numerous years. I mean, I know the Howard government changed the Marriage Act basically to say, no, marriage is only between a man and a woman.
Well, that's what happens when you put bigots and homophobes in government.
Exactly.
What do you expect?
That's generational. I was looking at the history of it, and then obviously the history in America and the struggle the gay community, the lesbian community have had over there seems to be longer and harder. There were more people falling on their swords to get the community where it needed to be. Is that your experience?
No, it's a little bit different. I think the pathway in the US was very different. So the US had been way out in front of Australia in terms of some of the states had domestic partnership and gay marriage legalised long before we did.
So if we talk about that, we'll just touch on.
Yep.
So we're talking about not just marriage, but we're talking about the situation where you're classified as de facto, and the laws that are associated with that, with protecting your individual rights and your rights as a couple.
Yeah, but the problem is, and I'm not a legal expert, but the problem is that marriage is written into so much legislation, federal and state legislation, that simply changing a state law to legalise marriage in the US, for instance, did not address the inequalities and the discrimination that was built into federal legislation. So, and it wasn't, really the watershed moment for the US was the Supreme Court decision that overturned all of that in one fell swoop for the whole country. It wasn't a conscious legislative government action. It was a court decision that actually overturned that and broke the dam, if you like, in the US. And Australia was a long way behind that.
Well, Australia was taking their lead from Britain because they're part of the Commonwealth. So we were basically aligning ourselves with what they were doing legally.
Yeah, I think,
through the history that I can understand, the history of same-sex marriage.
I think the UK was well ahead of us anyway in terms of their legalising gay marriage, but should it have really taken until 2017?
No.
And should it have really taken a referendum? It was just the right thing to do. And has the world ended? No.
It just seems absurd. We were talking about white privilege before, and apparently I fall into that category. It's not offensive to me in any way, but when I look at the struggle that you've had and the community's had to have something basic like a right to marry somebody and have all the legal attachments to that's I've been married 3 times.
Yeah.
3 times. And you just take that stuff for granted.
Well, eventually we'll all get it right. Eventually
my wife's listening to this, so I think
practice makes perfect.
Third time lucky, I've found the one. I found the one that is hopefully going to put up with me for the rest of my life. But yeah, as I said, as a white heterosexual male, it's been taken for granted, and doing the research and finding out the struggle, it just seems absurd, and there's so many struggles going on for so many races, for so many groups, for so many, it's just, to this day and age, it just seems ridiculous. Yep. It just seems absolutely ridiculous.
Yep.
And the fighting and the continual fighting over certain stuff that continues today in certain in certain countries.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had lots of conversations over the last several months with folks that probably fall into the older, middle-aged, white heterosexual male demographic, and it's surprising how many of those, just because of what they've seen on my LinkedIn profile, want to have a conversation with me about their trans kid or their gay kid or their kid that's sort of is struggling or trying to cope with how to function in the world because they're not sort of in one of those sort of binary boxes, and so there's a whole community out there that's affected by discrimination, even if it's indirectly through a child or a family member.
Yeah. And it's good to know that the work that you guys are doing and the Pride Centre are setting people up to achieve some sort of, I'm not going to say normality, because when it comes to this, normal doesn't describe anything, does it? I mean, what is normal? I'm not normal. I'm far from normal. And we look at the diverse group of.
Well, who wants to be normal? Normal's
no,
boring.
exactly. Normal's boring.
Normal's average.
Yeah, who wants to be average?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Every person should be allowed to be outstanding.
Yes, and they need the opportunity to be outstanding.
Yep.
And I think with a lot of stuff, the education system and the education that's available to them is failing to do that. And I think that also comes back to parenting as well too. Now, you look at the youth today, we're not talking about the community that we're talking about. We're talking about the average youth that's got his face or her face in the screen.
Or their face.
Their face.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pronouns is a whole different discussion.
Yeah, it is.
I'm thank you for pulling me up because as I said, it's a little bit of a minefield in regards to that. So,
but it's okay. It's okay. Like if you feel comfortable talking about it, and you feel comfortable, getting feedback around, we haven't quite got it, 100%. And that's what it's about.
I get it.
Yeah.
I understand you know, my view on it is that, and I hate this when I go to a situation and somebody asks me what I do for work.
Yeah.
I fucking hate that question. It doesn't matter what I do. And the thing is with pronouns is that it doesn't matter. To me, you just tell me your name. What is your name? That's who you are to me. Anything else does not matter.
Yeah.
And as I said, that question about what do you do for it doesn't fucking matter what I do. You know, I could be a brain surgeon. I'm probably going to tell you that I'm a landscaper or I make furniture in my. It doesn't matter. You know, is that going to change? Well, that's exactly what happens. I tell you I do something, and then you've got a picture in your head of who you think I am.
Yeah.
Which is completely off skill, isn't it?
So what question would you like to be asked?
I just, how are you?
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah.
You know, people don't ask. They don't ask that enough. You know, It doesn't matter. The first thing I said to you when I met you is, "How are you?" It's great to see you.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it was a great chat. That dinner was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we're here tonight. So, yeah. Look,
I think just to pick up on the pronouns topic, it's important if you don't feel like you're included, because you're only referred to as a he or a her, and if you don't fit one of those binary classifications, then you feel excluded.
Okay, well, explain to me. I went through the list of chairpersons, and I looked at the photos. Male, female, him, her, he, she, through the whole thing. I don't understand why that needs to be. If you're a male and you're using a pronoun him, her, he, him, that doesn't make any difference to me, because I see who he is and I can identify him as a male.
Yeah,
So
but it's signalling to others that it's okay to be open about your pronouns.
Okay.
It's not about. It's a signal to others that it's okay to say what your pronouns are.
You're still going to have to explain. I still don't. I'm sorry. I still don't get it. I still don't get it.
Yep.
Is it something? Is it something that is now thought has been acceptable in this woke movement? Is this something that in another 10 years will just fall by the wayside and be?
Maybe, but right now,
is it important to you?
It's not important to me whether I'm called he, him, they, them, whatever. No, personally, because it doesn't worry me, because I don't feel excluded because I am a he, him. I don't feel excluded.
You're saying it's this construct is being created
for people
that don't fit into boxes.
Yeah, because gender identity is a spectrum. It's not a binary. That's the whole non-binary thing. And maybe I can send you some sort of information on that you could sort of read up on. It's probably too big of a topic to.
I was going to say it's probably a topic for another podcast.
But if you think of gender identity, and I'm not talking about sexual identity, I'm talking about gender identity.
Yeah. So just for our listeners,
it's not one or the other. It's a spectrum and everything in between.
So we've got gender identity, and we've got sexual identity. Is that
completely separate? Completely separate. Just 'cause if I identified as a female from a gender identity, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to have a corresponding sexual identity.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I said to you, I identify as a 12-year-old girl,
right?
Would you accept that because I've proposed it?
If that's the way you identify, that's the way you identify.
Would you think that's weird? Would you think that's odd?
If I didn't know that and understand that gender's a spectrum, and even if you're presenting as a cis male, if your real identity is something other, then it's part about respecting that individuality, respecting someone's identity is how they feel.
Yeah. So I think
I'm not sure I buy the 12-year-old part, but
It may have been a bad example. What I'm saying is that the one word you said there was respect.
Yeah.
Now, regardless of what I identify, you as a human and me as a human, I should respect you and you should respect me. That's
how you identify is how you identify.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you agree that that maybe some of this rhetoric is unnecessary?
What rhetoric do you mean?
This probably used the wrong word.
Yeah.
These descriptions and these boxes that people need to fit into.
If they're constrained to just binary, you're either that or you're something other.
Okay.
Right. We had a conversation about the other.
Exactly. That's offensive to you.
That it's just not respectful, because if you're not male or female and you're just in some other unclassified category that you don't relate to, then you're being excluded. Because you don't fit the social construct of male and female.
We were talking about the census. And that came up specifically about that.
Yeah, very important considerations around the census going on right now.
Can you explain to us a little bit more about...
So one of the things that makes it very difficult to actually hold governments accountable for the policies they do or don't implement, particularly around marginalised groups, is if those groups aren't measured in the census, then they can't be held accountable to having policies around those groups and their needs. So, and the census is a very critical data set that helps governments frame their forward policies. So,
well, they do it with religion, don't they?
Yeah.
There's a Jedi party in there. Did you know?
There's lots of different.
I think it's, but
there's lots of different.
They're not
niche. I'll call them niche parties, but there's lots of them that also have this sort of their single issue focus. But if you're not measuring it and you can't quantify, how many members of the community are impacted by a particular issue, whether it be discrimination, then how can you possibly have policies around it or justify policies around it? So it's almost like deliberate ignorance in not measuring.
Well, they're just turning their head, aren't they?
Yeah, it's an excuse to say it's not a big enough problem to worry about. We're not going to. If we don't measure it, then we don't have to deal with it.
So
very, very important that the census has the proper measurement of representation.
For sure. The 2021 census counted 78,425 same-sex couples living together in Australia.
Yeah.
Do you think that's accurate?
Oh, I think it's probably way underdone. How it doesn't really tell you. It doesn't really tell you a whole lot, to be honest.
So, how would if you were writing census form, how would you extend on it? What would be included in there and why?
Well, it needs to include all of those excluded those invisible groups, so we understand and have a true baseline. There's some research that's been done in the US around different generations of LGBT communities and the rates at which they identify as being members of that community. And if you go back to, and I'll get the stats wrong, but they're sort of directionally correct. If you look at sort of the baby boomer group, then their willingness to identify their identification or willingness to identify themselves as being part of LGBT community is 2%. If you look at the Gen Z group, which is the youngest group coming through, then they're identifying at rates of 21% are self-identifying as part of that group. So you could say, well, which of those stats is the more reliable? I'm tending to believe the younger generation is much more comfortable saying, because the environment we've created makes it more comfortable to identify and declare.
So they should be.
But if you reverse engineer that back through the older generations, does that mean that there are 19% of the baby boomer generation that aren't comfortable declaring, at least?
It would seem that way. Yeah. Well, you can understand why, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. The society has changed. It's a much more, still got a long way to go, mind you, but it's a much more open, inviting, welcoming society than it was, 40 years ago. But as I said, still a long way to go. So you've got to think if there's some real quantifiable numbers around this, it starts to focus attention on it and starts to force government to actually have programs and policies around it.
And they can have more of a say about stuff,
Yeah.
as they should.
Yeah.
Going forward, what do you want to see as a gay man or part of this community?
Yep.
What do you want to see happen? What do you want to achieve?
I want to see more openly gay, lesbian, bi, transgender leaders in companies, government departments, as role models and agents of change. That's the whole premise of what I'm doing.
So we're talking across the gamut of industry.
Yeah.
And
it's not going to happen in 12 months. It's not going to happen in 24 months. But, this journey for me is at least a 10-year journey before I'd expect to see really measurable change. But it's a journey I think it's worth going on.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to fight the fight.
Yeah. Well, I can't do it alone. As each of these folks come through the Pride in Action program, if a couple of them want to pick up the mantle and keep running with it, then that's a great outcome.
Well, I think you're going to set them up to do that. Yeah. And it's people like you that are putting these programs in place to create these platforms for people to step up, take the step up, and have that support that they need to do that.
Absolutely.
It should be this. It shouldn't be any different for any community or any association or anything across the board.
Yeah.
So good luck to you.
Thank you.
And you're doing a fantastic job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about my favourite subject. And share a nice drop of Buckfast with you.
Exactly. Now, I think we've probably got a few more podcasts in us. So if you don't mind coming back at some stage down the track,
sure.
and we can touch on some other stuff. I think we've covered a few great topics today.
Yeah, awesome.
I hope our listeners have taken something away from this. I've definitely taken something away from this. And that was the reason why I wanted to get you in here. So once again, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
And I hope you come back.
Thank you. Thank you for fulfilling my childhood dream.
My pleasure. That's a wrap, Mav.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in and for your time. You know the vibe, I'm steady living until I die. It's a loose state of mind and we showed you that. Keep it authentic and real, I hope you coming back. Hey, make sure that you subscribe, cause we got it popping all the time and it's going down. If you wanna elevate, wanna live a better life, keep it locked here. You know it's a loose state of mind, let's go.